Well, Joel and Joe, we've talked to so many of your American stars over the past couple of weeks. Noah and Annette and Matthew and Keri. It's good to have the brains behind this operation on today to talk about the Americans. Joe, let's start with you. This was your original idea to begin with?
Yeah, back in 2010, all these Russian illegals were arrested in America, and I got a call from the heads of DreamWorks Television who said, "You want to develop a series based on this?" And I thought that was a great idea, and I started thinking about different directions to take. And obviously, the most interesting thing about it was that these illegals, this very interesting type of spy that worked under this incredibly deep cover, and that was a real specialty of the KGB, and it was a little surprise to a lot of people that the Russian intelligence service had continued to do it after the fall of the Soviet Union. But it seemed like, developing the series around this kind of spy, these people who live as citizens of foreign countries under this kind of deep cover would be a very compelling idea for a series.
And Joel, you could have chosen really any period of time, especially like 60s, 70s, 80s. Why early 80s? Why did that work so well?
Well, it was really for Ronald Reagan, right? It was nothing beats Ronald Reagan and the way that he sort of started talking about the evil empire, and after the sort of quiet period during Ronald Reagan, ramped up the tension again and made it such a high stakes period when everybody was wanted to kill each other, and you thought the nuclear weapons might fly at any time. Just seemed like a good spot to go to.
And Joel, what are the challenges from a producing standpoint of not just your show, but anybody's show that's like period? You've got to make sure that things from outside that period don't accidentally show up. You've got to make sure everything's correct. Tell us just about working in a period piece.
It's funny. We had Joe and I had lunch with David Madden, the president of Fox Television Studios, which is the responsible studio on the show, and we were talking about the challenges of the show, and we were talking about what can we do that would make it easier to produce. And he said, "Oh, that's easy. You should not make a period set spy show in New York during the winter." Pretty much everything is really tough about making this show. Every time we go outside, every street sign, every parking meter, every lack of phone booth, every person with a cell phone, every extra has to be dressed. It's a challenge. And then we have the weather. Superstorm Sandy first season, Polar Vortex season 2. We're really hoping for a break next season. We'll see. But it's a challenge. On the other hand, I'd say on our snowiest day that we were shooting last year, the absolute snowiest day we shut down, but on the snowiest day where we were shooting, we happened to be shooting that exterior scene where Frank Gadd, played by Richard Thomas, is approached by Lev Gorn's character, Arkady. And they're standing outside, and because it was snowing, they were holding umbrellas, and it was just brutally tough to shoot, and it looked just like something out of a Le Carré novel. We couldn't have asked for more. So it's challenging, but sometimes it's a gift too.
Joe, let's talk about your cast a little bit as well. When we had Keri on last week, she said that when she first got the call, she's like, "Really? You want Felicity, the girl with the hair?" And I said, "Well, it makes sense to me. Why wouldn't you have the most all-American girl be the one least suspected?" What led you to Keri?
We had one of these lists that you have when you're trying to cast one of these shows with almost every Hollywood actress of an appropriate age, and there were a lot of names on there, and we were looking down this list, and it was really John Landgraf just pointed and said Keri Russell. And it was sort of, I think, one of those moments of kind of intuition for him, and I think a lot of things went into it. From, in fact, sort of the counterintuitive element of Keri, who had been Felicity so many years ago and turning her into a dark and brooding KGB spy, but also, in a lot of her work that she did since then, if you saw things like Waitress, she's such an incredible actress, and she can do anything, as you see now on The Americans, to be able to be this suburban mom who is simultaneously a killer, but also able to be a nurturing mother. It just requires a lot, and she's brilliant at it.
I remember when J.J. Abrams was in, it might have been something like TV Guide or something, I read this, when he came off of Felicity and he was developing Alias, he said, "It's Felicity as a spy." And I mean, that was his little tagline, and all these years later, you actually make Felicity into a spy.
He may have been onto it a little bit early, that's true.
And Joel, what about Matthew? Where did you get Matthew?
Well, Joe, correct me if I'm wrong. Was that originally through Leslie? Was she the one who saw him in a play?
Yeah, she saw him in a play in New York, and she had, I think, knew him from Brothers and Sisters as well. But then she saw him in this play, I think it was called Look Back in Anger, in New York, and she said, "You guys have to go see this play. He's just incredible and be great in this part." And that was where that all began.
And Noah, I think, came through Gavin O'Connor, who directed the pilot, who had a great relationship with him from all his prior movies. We are so blessed with this cast. It's on certain shows you wind up having to write defensively, because actors have certain strengths and they have certain weaknesses, and you want to write to their strengths and you want to avoid their weaknesses. And one thing we discovered pretty early on in the first season of this show is we were blessed with a cast that not only worked hard and not only was really positive on set and made it a great experience for us, but they could take anything we brought to them. And I think it's one of the things that allowed us to make the show what it is, because it's unleashed us creatively to do whatever feels right for the characters, knowing that they'll get there and how.
Well, this includes the kids, too, and you see how central the kids are becoming to the show. And, if we didn't have kids who were able to do these really complex things, it's hard to imagine, or think how different the story would have to be.
And just imagine what it was like first season when we called our casting director and said, look, we need a beautiful woman in her early 20s. She's got to be able to deliver deep, deep emotional stuff. She's got to play mystery. We've got a long arc for her. And by the way, it's very important that she be fluent in Russian.
And the answer was, okay, and I'll tell you what, we'll find one who's also fluent in Hindi. And that is.
Well, you mentioned the kids, and spoiler alert here for anybody watching, tune away if you haven't seen this season. But the end of this season, you're now developing this storyline where Paige, especially Paige, maybe the boy later on, but the big bosses are already recruiting her, or want to recruit her into the system there.
Yeah, this is interesting. This is really historical. The KGB did try to do this and was interested in doing this with the kids of their illegals, even as recently as these the 2010 cases, which of course were the successor to the KGB. This was actually done. One of the fathers recruited his son into the service. Some of the people who've been writing about the show have sort of said, well, this part seems like pure fantasy, but in fact, this is a storyline we got out of the history of the intelligence service.
One of the nice ways that you introduced that, though, that I thought was, rather than it being a surprise, just a surprise at the end, you've really been able to weave a storyline all year about this other boy who had been trying to be, they tried to recruit, who wanted to do that, whose parents got really upset over it. So you laid the groundwork without us even knowing it.
Well, thank you. It was fun. Joe and I started at the end of season 1 with these long walks talking about what we wanted to explore in the second season, and we knew it would be about family. And as soon as we landed on the idea of this parallel family and this murder, we knew we had something that not only would give us some story engine, but more importantly would give us something that we could explore in terms of their characters. Worked out well. We were lucky. It was a lucky season creatively that way.
It really was. Joel's busy trying to talk me out of having another parallel family that gets murdered for season 3. I think it works so well we should do it again, but he says we can't.
Just don't let it be the sun this time.
There you go. There's the twist, Joel. It's not the sun this time.
It was all a dream.
I've got our chat room open, and I want to ask questions occasionally if I see a good one. And Ramona asks, first of all, she says, love your show.
Thanks, Ramona.
She says, my question is, who writes the Russian dialogue, and how much fact-checking do you have to do about all of the Russian facts and information?
Well, we do this process sort of the reverse of the way it happens, generally in a foreign film with translation. We write it in English, and then we have a translator who translates it into Russian for the subtitles. And
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, what were you going to say? Go ahead.
I was going to say, but what we do is we're not actually writing the dialogue. We write the subtitles that would have been translated by a translator, and then we have a translator who reverse engineers them into the dialogue that would be appropriate for the subtitles. So it's an interesting process.
Right. In other words, she doesn't have to translate word for word what we've written. she's allowed to turn it into more colloquial, appropriate Russian. And then when we hear someone say, oh, that really is how a Russian would speak, we're very happy. And we get that more than, oh, that Russian was all off. We get that rarely. So we feel that we handled it well.
And all of the actors in those scenes, is it something that is already a second language, or maybe even a first language for them, or several of them really having to do it phonetically?
Oh, none do it phonetically. They all speak Russian. They're all Russian speakers. I think the only one who actually studied Russian was Peter von Berg from the first season, who played Vasily. And I think the others all have Russian from their childhood. But Peter studied for a long time, and I believe lived there for a while and has performed in Russian before.
We heard he was even a dialect coach, so that made us happy.
And Matthew and Keri occasionally have to do a few phrases. Are they fluent in that, or is that something unusual?
No, they both happen to be fluent in Russian. They both were born in the Soviet Union.
You hit the jackpot on casting, you know.
That's acting.
Well, I especially talked to Matthew on Friday about, or earlier this week, I'm sorry, about, you know, and of course he was speaking in his normal accent, and I don't know how he does it. I mean, he's a Welsh actor playing Russian, you know, hiding as an American, using an American accent, who I compared him to Gary Sinise. I said, you sound so much like Gary Sinise, that Midwestern sort of, even the same kind of inflections and all. So that's highly unusual for somebody to have to do all of that.
It's pretty, I mean, 3 years into this thing, I still get a kick out of it when he's talking in his Welsh accent.
But, you know, it's interesting. In one of these Emmy forums we were at, he said something that really stuck with me because it reminded me somewhat, Joe, of our writing process, which he acknowledged that the material is dense and layered. And when we write, we spend a lot of time talking about all the different things we want to explore and all the different layers. But ultimately, when you write a scene, you pick one truth to follow through the scene and hope that the other stuff accrues and accumulates behind it. And he was saying that he feels, from an acting standpoint, that they do the same thing. Although he didn't mention our process, he just talked about his. That he looks at the material, looks for all of its possible explanations, and then finds the truth he wants to play. And it sure seems to work.
Yeah.
When Matthew did have one request, though, and it came through one of the fan questions, and that was, do you ever anticipate a scene between Annette, Matthew, and Keri? Since they're all Russians, basically.
That's an interesting question. You know, I remember early in season 1 in the writers' room, there were people really agitating for you know, Arkady and Philip to have a scene at one point, and I remember, you know, so vociferously saying that could never happen. It would be such a violation of tradecraft. We will never ever see that. And sure enough, you know, when the time was right and the circumstances were right, I ate all those words very gladly at the end of season 2. So who knows?
Well, I will say, when I mentioned that same thing to Annette, she got real nervous, and she said, well, Stan knows all three of them, and if he happened to see them together, she said, that would be the end of me.
Well, I mean, she's not in very good shape anyway right now. But
well, that's right. She wouldn't give anything up either. I don't know if she is aware if she's coming back or not, but I got to say, all four of them were very good and cagey and very spy-related, because they wouldn't say anything about next year.
Well, we can tell you that that Nina is in a car on the way to the airport. We know that. And we know that her character will be part of the next season.
Well, she felt like she would be back. She didn't know she'd be in a Russian prison the whole season in a new drama called Red is the New Black. But or if she'd be in Washington or whatever. But she felt like she would be back under some circumstances.
I like that. That's a good spinoff.
That would be a good show, her in a Russian prison for a whole season.
Yeah.
Tell me about, you got some great nominations in the past couple of weeks. At the Critics' Choice TV Awards, you've got drama series, Matthew, Keri, and Annette all. And then at the TCA Awards in July, you're up for a drama series, and Matthew is up. Tell us about what those kinds of recognitions mean for your show right now.
Well, first of all, it's just very heady. in just the nicest possible way. Just to have people appreciate the show so much and feel recognized in that way. All of us on the show, and there are hundreds of us, work so hard, and to feel that people are appreciating the show on that level, it's just a great feeling.
Joel?
I'm miserable about it personally. No, it is. It's an amazing feeling, and Joe, you're right. There are so many people who work on this and contribute to it. It really is such a collaborative effort. But the truth is, when we're doing it in a bubble, and unlike a play where you perform it and the audience is there, you just don't know how it's going to be received, and it's incredibly gratifying to have this response and to have the response from the critics and from the audience. And one of the things that Joe and I talk about is one of the most gratifying things is that people get it. So when we read the blogs and we read the critics, they're not only liking it, but they're seeing in it what we hoped they would see. And that's a very gratifying thing.
Well, to the credit of both of you and your whole staff, I mean, there are major storylines, but just like a good novel, there's lots of undercurrent going on. There's a lot of allusions and metaphors and other things that are happening that if you're a real fan or you want to dig a little deeper and watch it, a second time or think about it, I mean, there's a lot going on beyond just the surface.
There's a lot going on, and sometimes we will get confused ourselves for a moment, and that or more than a moment, and have to start, wait, what happened there, and how did that connect to that? And that's why we worry sometimes, is it too much? And so, as Joel says, it's gratifying to see that people are getting it and picking up all these things.
And speaking of all the critics nominations, and hopefully Emmys will follow suit in a few weeks, but the current state of drama, as you both well know, on TV is as good as it's ever been in the history of TV. I would say the last 5 years or so, between all of the cable product like you've got, FX, AMC, then you've got your premium channels like HBO and Showtime, great shows on broadcast like Good Wife and Hannibal and so forth. You couldn't be among a greater group of dramas programs, and then to be singled out among those, that's a wonderful tribute.
And how? I mean, it really is. It's something else.
What do you both watch? What kinds of shows do you like to watch? Joel, we'll start with you.
Watch Game of Thrones. Watch Masters of Sex. Watch Veep. Really enjoy episodes. Really enjoy Girls. Love Louis. Oh my God, what a season Louis has given us. Fargo.
It'll be entered in drama this year, right?
Huh?
I said it should be entered as a drama this year.
By the way, thank goodness they chose not to enter him in drama this year. He could have competed in both categories and possibly won. I mean, that last long episode, whatever it was, 90 minutes, was extraordinary. Just so beautiful and moving and funny. Fargo, Justified. How's that for a start?
That's a lot.
Who has time to watch during the season? I'm just catching up now. Oh, the Mindy Project also. I really like the Mindy Project.
Joe?
Well, it's funny. Our lists are very similar, and I was going to say about that I finished that last episode of Louis about his childhood and his daughter, and I walked away from the living room thinking maybe that's the most moving, best hour of television I've watched in my whole life. I mean, it was overwhelming to me. I watched those same FX shows. I watched those same HBO shows. I think that Veep is so funny that my wife and my daughter both came into the living room angry at me for waking them up the other night because I was laughing so hard, and I knew they were sleeping. I was trying not to. So that just says something about what's going on with how good the shows are on television right now. I think that
could be their new tagline: Veep, so funny it destroys families.
Well, you bring up a good point by mentioning some of these titles. Your show has a lot of political elements. You have Veep, you have House of Cards, you've got Scandal, just on and on and on. Why are political shows so hot right now?
I think that there's something about political shows that it just brings you, a lot of shows, of course, are insular and about emotions and people's lives. Probably all shows are about that if people are going to connect with them. But a political show also brings you into the outside world, and the importance of being connected to the outside world and what's going on there. I just think people are interested in that.
I also think there's a simple calculus, which is the higher the stakes, the greater the drama, and that's why medical shows, life and death, police shows, life and death, legal shows, the big ones do the higher stakes cases. It just makes for compelling drama, and I think politics is obviously it's high stakes for a lot of people.
Well, maybe Louis C.K. will see this. You can find some way. He works for FX too. You can find some way to get him on the third season, right?
He is officially invited as of now.
He just played a government official in American Hustle during that same time period, so he's ready to roll.
We could teach him a little Russian. Looks a little Russian.
We've met him a few times actually through some of the FX events, and he's, in addition to being incredibly talented, he's also very humble and very nice. So we
don't want guys like that.
We basically spent our entire Emmy Google Hangout talking about how the voters should focus on Louis. I don't know whether
vote for Louis.
Louis, pitch us in yours, please.
Well, as we finish up here, first of all, what's the production schedule like? When do you go back? You said you were already, I guess, working on writing. What's the timetable for this year for The Americans?
Go back.
Go ahead.
We go back into our writers' room mid-July. Joe and I have spent a lot of time talking about season 3 already, and although now we're down to just a document going back and forth, we hope we'll be able to really take some time off for a little bit before we go back mid-July, and then we start shooting early October.
One other question I just remembered, and then we'll finish up. I was in our forums the other day. Somebody in our forums felt like the girl on the bus that recruited Paige to go to church was actually working somehow for the Russians to get her to become passionate about something. And then later on they could flip her over to the stuff that they really want her to do. Is that true or not true?
We get great ideas like that sometimes on Twitter. I mean, we see things that we hadn't thought of, but that we think are really, I'm serious about it, that we think are really interesting ideas. That's a good idea.
And you said you're going to write soon. I'm sure you're already thinking of ideas and so forth. Give us just anything. Just give us a taste. Give us anything at all that we can say, hey, we learned something about season 3.
It's going to be about spies.
Well, I'll say this. We already we know from season 2 that there were some tough things going on in Afghanistan, and we know from history that war is picking up and getting uglier. And I think that's going to continue to be a difficult, painful, ugly war for the Soviets and therefore for our characters.
And I'll add one thing that we've talked a lot about, which is much as the first season explored the struggles in this fake marriage as they were trying to find each other, and the second season found them as a couple really in a good marriage trying to figure out what their equilibrium was. As suggested in the end of season 2, this is now a couple who's going to find themselves grappling with some really big conflicts in their marriage, conflicts about the most important thing in their lives, their children, and we'll see how that affects them.
Well, so many of us on our website enjoy the show. Good luck at the 2 Critics Awards coming up this summer, and we're pulling for you on some Emmy nominations. Justified, I've mentioned this several times, but on your same network, did nothing really at the Emmys the first year and then blew up in the second year. So maybe that'll happen for you as well.
Thanks so much, Chris. We appreciate it.
All right. Have a great summer.
Thanks, Chris.